Picture this. You step onto a sleek train in central London. The city rushes past in a blur of glass and steel. Minutes later, the tunnel opens, and sunlight hits your face as the track glides straight toward the water. Out in the distance, rising from the waves, sits something extraordinary. Not a ship, not an island, but a colossal airport, hovering above the sea like a vision pulled from a sci-fi future. A project like this was no fantasy sketch. It was a genuine proposal, debated in rooms filled with the UK's sharpest minds. A blueprint designed to rewrite the rules of aviation itself. At the time, Heathrow was bursting at the seams, choking under demand it was never built to handle. It had become loud, crowded, restricted by curfews, boxed by homes and communities that had grown around it for decades. Britain needed breathing room, more flights, less noise, more ambition. And some thinkers believed the solution wasn't to expand into the city, but to escape it entirely. By the early 2010s, Heathrow had climbed far beyond its comfort zone. Passenger numbers were skyrocketing, pushing the airport into near-constant overdrive. With only 2 runways handling almost non-stop traffic, even minor disruptions rippled into hours of delays. Other global hubs were rising faster, shinier, bigger. Cities like Dubai, Doha, Singapore, and Hong Kong were setting new standards, and London was struggling to keep pace. The heart of UK aviation was working hard, but it was running out of runway, in every sense of the phrase. Then came the boldest question of all. What if Britain stopped trying to squeeze more airport into limited land, and instead built one where the sky meets the ocean, where planes could descend over water, far from bedrooms, far from noise lawsuits, far from midnight curfews, where infrastructure could be engineered from scratch without urban friction. A place built to operate all day, all night, no pause button, no volume limits. 2 major visions surfaced, each jaw-dropping in its own way. One imagined planting runways onto newly formed land in the estuary, stitching the airport into the nation's rail spine, and shielding the city from rising waters at the same time. The other took things even further. Instead of claiming land from the sea, it proposed floating on it. Gigantic platforms engineered like ocean titans, anchored to the seabed, capable of growing in phases, adapting like a living structure responding to demand. Support for these ideas was loud. Political heavyweights saw the spectacle, the global edge, the statement it would make. The possibility of converting Heathrow's massive footprint into housing in green urban space once flights shifted east was also floated. A total reset, a new gateway for Britain, rising offshore, carrying passengers and cargo around the globe without rattling the city below. But reality pushed back. The Thames estuary is not empty water. It's a breathing ecosystem, a sky highway for migratory birds traveling in dense formations, a challenge for aircraft safety when nature controls the airspace too. The waters also conceal a chilling ghost from history. A sunken wartime vessel still loaded with unstable explosives, resting quietly under the tides, a reminder that not all foundations are safe to build on. Then there was the weather. Heavy mist, sudden fog banks, the kind that could swallow visibility in seconds, creating risks engineers couldn't wish away with confidence. Critics raise another concern. Could a structure suspended on water endure the daily thunder of aircraft landings, the corrosion of salt air, and storms rolling in from the North Sea? Could it survive decades of vibration, impact, and fatigue while keeping operations flawless? And above everything loomed the biggest barrier of all, the cost. Towering estimates that felt more like national GDP projects than airport budgets. Billions stacking into timelines stretching so far ahead that even believers began whispering the word impossible. After years of debate, studies, and political storms, the decision landed back on familiar ground. Expand what already exists. Improve what's already working. The offshore dream was shelved, ruled too risky, too disruptive, too expensive, too unproven at a global scale. Heathrow got its green light for a 3rd runway instead. The practical choice, the safer bet, the grounded answer. But here's the twist. Some of the concepts born from those floating airport dreams don't feel so outrageous anymore. Around the world, engineers are testing the waters, quite literally. Solar grids bobbing offshore, powered by the sun. data fortresses rising from fjords and seas, cooled by nature itself. Modular ocean platforms being explored for cities, energy, and climate resilience. The idea of building on water is no longer a punchline. It's a growing category. And as aviation evolves, moving toward cleaner fuels, vertical takeoff aircraft, and AI-guided logistics, the definition of an airport may not remain what it once was. Maybe Britain didn't cancel a failure. Maybe it postponed an era. Because the truth is, infrastructure isn't just concrete and steel. It's identity. It's confidence. It's a nation deciding what kind of future it wants to live inside. And for a brief window in time, Britain dared to imagine runways that weren't chained to the ground. It pictured terminals rising above tides, trains slicing across water, and airports doubling a shield against climate chaos. Even though those plans never materialized, they shifted something deeper. They nudged public conversation from what can we fix to what can we reinvent. They challenged the belief that progress must always expand outward from the past, instead of leaping away from it. And that willingness to think at a planetary scale, that alone was historic. Today, as sea levels climb, cities crowd tighter, and clean energy becomes a new currency of global power, the ocean is no longer seen as a barrier. It's being reclassified, reevaluated, reimagined as a surface to build on, instead of a void to build around. The seeds planted by Britain's floating airport debate now echo in labs, shipyards, and coastal engineering projects worldwide. Maybe those proposals weren't abandoned because they were wrong. Maybe they were silenced because they arrived too early, in a world not yet desperate enough, bold enough, or technologically ready to cradle them. Timing is the invisible architect of history, and the clock may have simply been ahead of its audience. But every shelved idea leaves a wake, a quiet pressure wave pushing the next generation of thinkers to go further. Faster, braver. The future doesn't always roar when it begins. Sometimes it whispers, from beneath waves, or in this case, above them. Because visionary projects aren't always measured by completion. Sometimes their real power lies in disruption, in shaking the status quo so hard that even the rejection becomes part of progress. Britain's floating airport debate forced engineers, politicians, and the public to stare at the same horizon and ask uncomfortable questions. Questions about space, sustainability, noise, climate survival, and the future role of megacities in a world where land is finite, but ambition is not. The idea may have been parked, but the conversation it triggered, that kept moving, gathering speed like the very rail lines that were once designed to reach it. Look around the world now. The ocean is evolving into real estate for innovation. Energy platforms drifting offshore like power stations of tomorrow. Modular marine construction being tested not just for industry, but for civilization. The world is quietly learning how to float its biggest ideas instead of grounding them in compromise. Airports, too, are changing shape in our imagination. No longer just transit zones, but potential eco-machines, logistics fortresses, energy harvesters, climate shields. What once sounded like outrageous engineering theater now sounds inevitable. And maybe that's the point. The future doesn't ask permission when it arrives. It simply makes old doubts look outdated. So when we revisit Britain's offshore airport proposals, the question isn't just could it have worked? The deeper question is, were we brave enough to try? Because being first isn't about success. It's about influence, about daring loudly enough that the world eventually catches up, even if your own blueprint never leaves the drawing board. London stayed on land. Heathrow expanded. The skies kept moving. And Britain remained competitive, yes, but not revolutionary. Because if there's one thing history has taught us, it's this. The most ambitious ideas are rarely killed. They are archived, stored away like seeds in a vault, waiting for a world that finally needs them. Britain's offshore airport vision wasn't just about aviation. It was about reclaiming control over constraints, noise, land, pollution, public patience, even climate anxiety. It was a proposal that treated infrastructure not as separate pieces, but as one synchronized organism, transport, energy, defense, economy, all working as one giant mechanical heartbeat. And maybe that's why it felt so intimidating. Not because it lacked logic, but because it had too much of it. Too many advantages stacked in one place. Too many moving parts. Too much reinvention at once, for a system used to gradual upgrades. But here's the fascinating part. The 21st century is becoming the era of multipurpose engineering. We're no longer impressed by projects that do one job. We're impressed by projects that do 10, silently, efficiently, intelligently, without demanding applause. The world is warming. Coastlines are shifting. Populations are swelling into vertical cities. And the pressure on transport hubs is reaching a breaking point once again in capitals across the globe. The kind of pressures that once pushed Britain to look at the sea. And this time, the world might be listening differently. Imagine a future where airports don't bulldoze cities. They protect them. Where runways generate power instead of just consuming it. Where noise complaints disappear because innovation redesigned the map instead of fighting it. A future where expansion means moving forward, not moving outward. That future was once debated in London. And while it was dismissed then, the logic behind it didn't vanish. It diffused, traveled, quietly inspired a generation of marine architects, sustainable transit planners, and offshore structural engineers who are now shaping entirely different industries. The idea of floating infrastructure is no longer bizarre. It's experimental, and experiments are how revolutions begin. So maybe Britain didn't miss the future. Maybe it simply introduced it. Early, awkward, loud, imperfect, but influential, because the world's greatest transformations don't always begin with a ribbon cutting. Sometimes they begin with a question that are daring, slightly outrageous, what if whispered above restless water. And you just heard one of them. Thanks for watching the video. If you liked the video, so subscribe my channel.